Struggling black widower repairs engine for stranded woman. Next day, helicopter lands at his trailer. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on Elijah Carter's weathered hands as he tightened the last bolt on an ancient lawn-mower engine. Sweat trickled down his temple, leaving clean trails through the grime on his dark skin. At 48, his face carried the weight of a man who had seen his share of hardship, but his eyes, deep brown and clear, still held a quiet dignity that life hadn't managed to take from him. "That should do it," he muttered to himself, wiping his hands on a rag that was nearly black with oil and years of use. The trailer yard around him wasn't much to look at. 3 acres of sun-bleached grass scattered with the mechanical ghosts of better days, half-disassembled motors, a rusting tractor he'd been meaning to salvage parts from, and the weathered single-wide he'd called home since Margaret passed. The factory closing had forced him to turn his hobby into his livelihood, and fixing engines for the folks around these parts barely kept the lights on. Elijah glanced at his watch, a simple timepiece with a cracked face that had been Margaret's last gift before the cancer took her. 4:30. Still time to finish Mr. Henderson's chainsaw before calling it a day. The distant sound of an engine sputtering, then dying, pulled his attention toward the country road that passed his property. He squinted against the glare. A sleek black SUV, the kind that never stopped in this part of the county, had pulled onto the gravel shoulder about 50 yards from his driveway. Elijah watched as the driver's door opened and a woman emerged. Even from a distance, he could tell she didn't belong here. Her clothing was simple but had that certain crisp quality that spoke of expense. She lifted the hood and stared inside as if it might explain itself to her. He sighed. He hadn't planned on another job today, and strangers made him uneasy since Margaret died. But leaving someone stranded in this heat didn't sit right with him either. Margaret would have invited her in for sweet tea already, he muttered, grabbing his toolbox. As he approached, he noticed more details. The woman was perhaps in her mid-30s, with chestnut hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Her face was angular, intelligent, and guarded. The SUV, upon closer inspection, was even more expensive than he'd first thought, foreign-made with all the trimmings. "Having some trouble?" Elijah called out when he was close enough. The woman's head snapped up, eyes narrowing slightly as she assessed him. It was a look Elijah had seen before, calculating risk, measuring the stranger before her. "It just died on me," she said, her voice controlled but frustrated. "No warning. Nothing." Elijah nodded. "Mind if I take a look?" After a moment's hesitation, she stepped aside. "Please. I'd appreciate it." Elijah set his toolbox down and leaned over the engine. The components were unfamiliar, newer, more complex than most he worked on, but the principles remained the same. "What brings you out this way?" he asked conversationally, his hands already moving methodically through a diagnostic check. "Not many folks drive through unless they're headed somewhere specific." The woman didn't answer immediately. When Elijah glanced up, he caught an expression he couldn't quite read, something between caution and curiosity. "I'm Claire," she finally said, ignoring his question. "And you are?" "Elijah Carter. I fix things." He gestured vaguely toward his property. "That's my place back there." Claire followed his gaze to the trailer and the scattered mechanical inventory around it. Something in her posture changed, softened slightly. "You live alone?" Elijah's hands paused briefly on the engine. "Yes, ma'am. My wife passed 3 years back." "I'm sorry," she said, and it sounded genuine. Elijah shrugged and returned to his work. "Found your problem. Fuel injection system's acting up, and there's a loose connection to your battery. I can fix it here, but it'll take about an hour." Claire checked her watch, a thin, elegant thing that probably cost more than Elijah made in months. "I don't have much choice, do I? You could call a tow, but nearest garage is Jenkins in town, and he closed early today. His daughter's got a recital." Elijah straightened up. "You're welcome to wait in the shade by my place. Got cold water in the fridge." Claire hesitated, then seemed to make up her mind. "I'll wait by the car, thanks." Elijah nodded and got to work. The sun continued its relentless assault as he methodically traced the problem through the engine's complex systems. He was aware of Claire watching him, not with suspicion anymore, but with a curious intensity that made him slightly uncomfortable. After 20 minutes of silence broken only by the sounds of his tools against metal, she spoke. "You seem to know what you're doing. Been fixing engines since I was 12. He replied without looking up. My daddy believed a man should know how things work. And what does he think of your operation here? Elijah's lips twitched in what might have been the ghost of a smile. He's been gone 20 years now. But he'd probably say I'm wasting my talent on other folks' problems instead of building something of my own. Claire's eyes swept over the trailer yard again. Were you always a mechanic? No, ma'am. Worked at the Westlake manufacturing plant for 22 years. Supervisor for the last 8. Then they moved operations overseas. His voice held no bitterness, just a matter-of-fact acceptance. Margaret got sick around the same time. So I turned to what I knew best. He fell silent, focusing on a particularly stubborn connection. When he looked up again, Claire had moved closer, her arms crossed, studying him with an expression he couldn't quite place. Why did you help me? She asked abruptly. I could be anyone. Dangerous even. Elijah raised an eyebrow. Ma'am, with respect, you don't look particularly dangerous to me. And where I come from, you help folks in need. Simple as that. Nothing's that simple, she said, almost to herself. Some things are. Elijah wiped his hands. My daddy used to say there's only 2 things that matter in the end, how you loved and how you helped. Everything else is just noise. Claire's eyes widened slightly, as if his words had struck something unexpected within her. For a moment, her carefully composed expression slipped, revealing a glimpse of something vulnerable underneath. That's not what my father taught me, she said quietly. Different men, different lessons. Elijah shrugged. Almost done here. Claire opened her purse, expensive leather, he noticed, and pulled out a wallet. How much do I owe you? Elijah considered for a moment. The parts were minimal, just his time really. But he could see from her clothing, the car, the watch, money wasn't an issue for her. 200 should cover it, he said. She pulled out 3 crisp $100 bills and held them out. Take 3. For the quick service. Elijah looked at the money, then back at her face. Something in him, pride perhaps, or something deeper, made him shake his head. 2 is the fair price. I don't take charity, and I don't overcharge. Not even folks who can afford it. A strange expression crossed Claire's face, surprise followed by something that might have been respect. She put 1 bill back and handed him the other 2. Their fingers brushed in the exchange, and Elijah was struck by how smooth her hands were compared to his calloused ones. People usually don't turn down money when it's offered, she remarked. I'm not most people. Elijah closed the hood with a solid thunk. Try it now. Claire slid into the driver's seat and turned the key. The engine purred to life immediately, the sound strong and steady. Thank you, she said as she stepped back out. I appreciate your help, Elijah. Just doing what needs doing, he replied. She lingered by the car door, seemingly reluctant to leave. Can I ask you something personal? Elijah nodded cautiously. After everything, losing your job, your wife, how do you keep going? How do you trust that things will get better? The question caught him off guard. It wasn't what strangers asked each other, especially not by the side of a road on a hot afternoon. But something in her eyes, a genuine need to understand, made him answer. I don't know that things will get better, he said honestly. But Margaret used to say that bitterness is a luxury for people with too much time on their hands. I got engines to fix, bills to pay. And some days that's enough. Claire looked at him for a long moment, as if memorizing his face. Some people would be broken by what you've endured. Maybe. But being broken doesn't mean you stop working. He gestured toward the now humming engine. Most things can be fixed if you're patient enough to understand what's wrong. Claire nodded slowly, then extended her hand. It was enlightening meeting you, Elijah Carter. He shook her hand, noting the firmness of her grip. "Safe travels, Claire." She got into the SUV without another word. As she pulled away, Elijah couldn't shake the feeling that something about the entire encounter had been off-kilter, like an engine running just slightly out of tune. Claire had never explained what brought her to this remote road, and her questions had been strangely personal. Elijah watched until the SUV disappeared around a bend, then turned back toward his trailer. The evening was settling in, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that Margaret would have loved. Tomorrow would be another day of fixing what others had broken, of making just enough to keep going. He had no way of knowing that his encounter with Claire would change everything, that by this time tomorrow, his quiet life would be shattered like glass under a hammer's blow. The rhythmic thumping woke Elijah before his alarm. At first, he thought it was his old refrigerator finally giving up the ghost, but the sound grew louder, more insistent. He rolled out of bed and pulled aside the thin curtain covering his window. "What in God's name?" A sleek black helicopter hovered over his property, kicking up dust and sending the few neighborhood strays scattering into the underbrush. The whirlwind it created sent empty oil cans tumbling across his yard like tin tumbleweeds. Elijah pulled on his pants and a clean shirt, the one he saved for church, and stepped onto his front porch just as the helicopter touched down in the only clear space large enough, flattening what remained of Margaret's flower garden. His hand instinctively went to the small of his back, where many of his neighbors kept a pistol. Elijah had never felt the need, but as the helicopter's door slid open, he wondered if today might prove him wrong. Instead of agents or men in tactical gear, a familiar figure emerged. Claire, but transformed. Gone was yesterday's casual attire, replaced by a tailored suit that probably cost more than his trailer. Her hair was styled differently, her posture somehow more commanding. Two men in dark suits followed her, scanning the area with practiced efficiency. "Good morning, Elijah," she called out, walking toward him as if landing a helicopter in someone's yard was perfectly normal behavior. "I hope I didn't wake you too early." Elijah crossed his arms. "Most folks use the driveway." A smile flickered across her face. "I've never been accused of being most folks." She gestured to his porch. "May we talk?" Elijah hesitated, then nodded. Something told him his life was about to take a turn he couldn't predict. He offered her the only decent chair on the porch, an old rocker that had been Margaret's favorite, while he leaned against the railing. "I wasn't entirely honest with you yesterday," Claire began, getting straight to the point. "Figured as much. Folks with cars like yours don't break down on back roads by accident." Claire's eyes widened slightly, impressed. "You're right. It wasn't an accident." She leaned forward. "My name is Claire Davenport." The name hung in the air between them. Even Elijah, who paid little attention to the business world, recognized it. Davenport Industries, one of the largest technology and manufacturing conglomerates in the world. "Richard Davenport's daughter," he said flatly. Claire nodded. "His only child and heir. In 3 weeks, I officially take control of the company. My father is stepping down." Elijah's mind raced, trying to connect yesterday's stranded motorist to this revelation. "So what were you doing here? Some kind of rich person's game?" "A test," she corrected. "For the past month, I've been visiting communities where we might expand operations. Not as Claire Davenport, but as nobody special. I needed to see how people behave when they don't know who I am or what I can give them." Elijah's jaw tightened. "And I was just another lab rat in your experiment." "At first," Claire admitted. "The broken-down car is a scenario I've used before. Some people ignore me. Some help, then overcharge. Some help and expect other forms of payment." She held his gaze. "But you were different. You helped without hesitation, charged a fair price, and refused extra money you could clearly use. Basic decency isn't something special," Elijah said, uncomfortable with her scrutiny. "In my world it is." Claire's voice hardened. "Do you know what I've found in my month of testing people, Elijah? Dishonesty. Greed. Opportunism. But you..." She shook her head in wonder. You spoke about your values with such conviction. About how your father taught you what matters. One of the suited men approached, whispered something in her ear, then retreated. Claire nodded and continued. I'm here to offer you a job. Head mechanic for my private innovation lab. We're developing new engine technologies, cleaner, more efficient designs that could change transportation forever. You'd have housing on the estate, a salary that would make money worries a thing of the past, and the chance to build something that matters. Elijah stared at her, certain he'd misheard. You want me to work for you? Because I fix your car without overcharging? Because you have the two qualities I need most, extraordinary mechanical intuition and uncompromising integrity. Claire stood. The helicopter can take us now. Your new living quarters are already prepared. Now? Just like that? Elijah laughed in disbelief. Lady, I don't care how rich you are. Normal people don't uproot their lives on a moment's notice for strangers. Not strangers, Claire corrected. I've had you thoroughly vetted. Former Marine. 22 years at Westlake with an impeccable record. Community college degree in mechanical engineering that you couldn't finish because your father got sick. She held up a hand to stop his protest. I know it feels invasive, but I had to be sure. Elijah stepped back, suddenly feeling exposed. And what happens to my home? My life here? It will be maintained, if that's what you want. Or sold, with proceeds deposited to your account. The choice is yours. Claire's expression softened. Elijah, I'm offering you a chance most people dream of, to be recognized for your true worth. The morning sun illuminated the helicopter's sleek form, so out of place among his shabby possessions. Elijah thought of Margaret, of the dreams they'd once shared, of the life that had slowly contracted around him after she died. I need some time, he said finally. You have until the helicopter leaves, Claire replied. 5 minutes. She walked down the steps and back toward her waiting craft. Elijah stood frozen on his porch, the weight of decision pressing down on him like a physical force. Everything in him warned against radical change, against trusting too quickly. But as he looked around at his lonely existence, at the trailer that had become more of a shell than a home, he heard Margaret's voice in his head, clear as day. Sometimes the biggest risk is not taking one at all. Before the helicopter's blades began to turn again, Elijah Carter had made his choice. The helicopter cut through clouds like they were nothing more than wisps of cotton. Elijah gripped the edge of his seat, his weathered toolbox, the only possession he'd insisted on bringing, clutched between his knees. He hadn't been airborne since returning from his military service decades ago, and his stomach lurched with each banking turn. First time in a private helicopter? Claire asked, noticing his white-knuckled grip. First time in any helicopter that wasn't military, Elijah admitted. The landscape below had transformed from rural countryside to manicured estates that grew increasingly grand. Where exactly are we going? Davenport Estate. It's about 30 miles north of the city. Claire handed him a tablet. This is where you'll be working. The images on the screen showed a sprawling compound with multiple buildings, including what appeared to be a massive workshop facility gleaming with state-of-the-art equipment. Elijah's mouth went dry. The entire setup probably cost more than he would have earned in 10 lifetimes at the factory. I don't belong in a place like this, he said quietly. Claire's eyes narrowed. That's exactly the kind of thinking I'm trying to change in my company. Talent and integrity belong everywhere. The helicopter began its descent toward a private landing pad nestled among immaculate gardens. As they touched down, Elijah spotted a small group waiting for them, men and women in expensive suits, their postures radiating authority and impatience. The welcoming committee doesn't look too welcoming, Elijah observed. Claire's expression hardened slightly. They'll adjust. Come on. The moment they stepped onto the concrete pad, a tall man with silver hair strode forward, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. Claire, darling, this impromptu trip wasn't on the schedule. The board meeting had to be postponed. That was intentional, Victor, Claire replied coolly. May I introduce Elijah Carter? He'll be heading our prototype division's mechanical team. The man, Victor, barely glanced at Elijah before turning back to Claire. We should discuss this in private. There are protocols for new hires, especially for sensitive positions. Elijah stood awkwardly, feeling every bit the outsider. The others in the group were staring at him with expressions ranging from curiosity to undisguised disdain. One woman whispered something to her companion, who snickered behind his hand. Mr. Carter's credentials have been thoroughly vetted, Claire said firmly. Now, if you'll excuse us, I'd like to show him the facility. Victor stepped back, his face a mask of professional courtesy. Of course. Just remember, the Robertson meeting is at 3. Your father specifically asked that you handle it personally. As Claire led Elijah away from the group, he could feel their eyes boring into his back. They think I'm some kind of charity case, he muttered. They think I'm being rebellious, Claire corrected. Bringing in an outsider instead of promoting from within. It makes them nervous. They walked through gardens that probably required a small army to maintain, then into a modern building with glass walls that offered breathtaking views of the surrounding mountains. Each person they passed stopped to stare, conversations halting mid-sentence. Your guest suite is here, Claire said, stopping before a door that slid open automatically. Get settled in. Someone will come for you in an hour to take you to the workshop. The suite was larger than his entire trailer, with furnishings that looked too expensive to actually use. Elijah set his toolbox down on a marble counter, feeling increasingly out of place. Claire, he called as she turned to leave. What's really going on here? Why me? There must be thousands of engineers with better qualifications. She paused in the doorway. The board of directors expects me to be a puppet. My father built this company through innovation and risk-taking, but somewhere along the way, he became more concerned with stock prices than creating something meaningful. Her eyes flashed with determination. I'm going to remind them what Davenport Industries used to stand for. And I need people I can trust. After she left, Elijah explored his new accommodations, running his calloused hands over surfaces too perfect to be real. The bathroom alone was bigger than his bedroom at home, with a shower that had more settings than his old truck had gears. An hour later, a young man in a crisp uniform arrived to escort him to the workshop. As they walked through another series of immaculate corridors, Elijah's unease grew. So, what exactly does Ms. Davenport want me to do here? He asked. The young man gave him a sidelong glance. That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Between you and me, there's a betting pool in the staff quarters. Most money's on you being her latest act of rebellion against her father. She has a history of it. What do you mean? Elijah asked sharply. Last year it was hiring ex-convicts for the security team. Before that, she pushed through a sustainability initiative that cost millions with questionable return. The young man shrugged. Don't get me wrong, her heart's in the right place. But some think she's more interested in making statements than making sense. They reached a set of double doors marked Prototype Division Authorized Personnel Only. The young man waved a badge, and the doors slid open. Good luck in there, he said with an enigmatic smile. You're going to need it. The workshop beyond was a mechanic's dream, tools that Elijah had only read about, engines in various stages of development, computer stations running complex simulations. But what caught his attention were the faces, a dozen engineers and technicians, all watching him with the same skeptical expression he'd seen earlier. A woman stepped forward, extending her hand. Dr. Samantha Wells, Division Director. You must be Claire's discovery. The word carried a weight of judgment that made Elijah's jaw clench. As he shook her hand, the doubt that had been gnawing at him since the helicopter landed crystallized into a cold certainty. He wasn't here because of his skills or his integrity. He was a symbol, a pawn in some power struggle he didn't understand. The question now was whether to walk away with his dignity intact or play along until he discovered Claire's true agenda. The answer, he suspected, would determine far more than just his future. 3 weeks into his new position, Elijah had established an uneasy routine. Each morning, He'd wake before dawn in his luxurious suite that still felt like someone else's home. He'd put on his own work clothes rather than the designer outfits that had mysteriously appeared in his closet, and head to the workshop while most of the estate was still asleep. The prototype team had gradually warmed to him, or at least to his undeniable skill with engines. Elijah's hands seemed to possess a sixth sense, diagnosing problems that had stumped engineers with multiple degrees. He spoke little, observed much, and kept his growing suspicions to himself. That morning, as he examined the newest prototype, an engine designed to run on a revolutionary hydrogen fuel system, something caught his eye. A small fitting on the injection line had been cross-threaded, almost imperceptibly. "Dr. Wells," he called to Samantha, who had reluctantly become his closest ally in the workshop. "Was anyone working on the fuel system yesterday?" She checked the digital log. "No. It was locked down after the successful test." "Why?" Elijah pointed to the fitting. "This has been tampered with. If we'd started this engine, the pressure buildup would have caused a catastrophic failure. Possibly an explosion." "That's impossible," Samantha said, bending to look closer. "The security protocols don't mean a thing if someone who knows the system wants to break them," Elijah finished. "This wasn't an accident or a mistake. This was deliberate." Samantha's face paled. "I need to report this to security." "Not yet," Elijah said, laying a hand on her arm. "This is too precise, too professional. If we raise the alarm now, whoever did this will just cover their tracks and try again another way." Over the next week, Elijah secretly installed his own monitoring system, old-school trip wires and detection methods he'd learned in the military, combined with tiny cameras he'd modified to escape detection. Each night he reviewed the footage, and each day he found and quietly corrected more accidents waiting to happen. On the 8th night, his patience was rewarded. The workshop's security system briefly went dark at 2:17 a.m., a glitch that had been occurring sporadically. But Elijah's independent system kept recording as a figure in a tailored suit entered, moved directly to the main test platform, and made subtle adjustments to the control unit. Elijah froze the image and zoomed in. Victor Chambers, Claire's COO and her father's right-hand man. He waited until the next day, watching Victor greet Claire warmly at a management meeting, all smiles and deference. The contrast between that mask and the cold precision of his sabotage made Elijah's blood boil. That evening, he requested a private meeting with Claire. They sat in her study, a room lined with books that looked actually read, unlike the decorative volumes in his suite. "Someone's trying to sabotage your engine prototypes," Elijah said without preamble, placing a tablet with the evidence before her. "And I can prove it's Victor Chambers." Claire didn't reach for the tablet. Instead, she studied Elijah's face with that same intense scrutiny he'd felt on the day they first met. "I know," she said simply. Elijah blinked. "You know? People could have been finished. Your entire project could have been destroyed. Victor wouldn't have let it go that far. The sabotage was designed to cause delays and embarrassing failures, not casualties." Claire finally picked up the tablet, nodding as she reviewed his evidence. "This is excellent work, Elijah. Better than my security team managed to compile." Elijah stood, suddenly angry. "If you knew, why didn't you stop it? Why risk your people's safety? Why bring me into this mess at all?" Claire set the tablet down. "Because I needed to be certain, and I needed someone Victor wouldn't suspect to gather the evidence. Someone with the right skills and the right, moral compass. You used me as bait," Elijah said flatly. "I gave you an opportunity," Claire corrected. "And you exceeded all my expectations." She rose and walked to the window, looking out over the estate. "Victor isn't acting alone. He's working with my father's oldest friend, Harrison Bennett, who runs our biggest competitor. They believe I'm too idealistic to lead Davenport Industries. Too focused on changing the world instead of maximizing profits." She turned back to him, and for the first time since he'd met her, Claire looked vulnerable. "My father was like you once, Elijah. A man with extraordinary skills and unwavering principles. He built this company to create innovations that would improve lives. Somewhere along the way, he lost sight of that mission. And where does that leave me? Elijah asked. Another pawn in your chess game against your father and his allies? Claire's eyes flashed. No. That's exactly where you're wrong. I didn't bring you here just for your mechanical skills or even to help me expose Victor. She stepped closer. I brought you here because when I look at you, I see the kind of integrity my father once had. The kind this company needs to rediscover. Elijah held her gaze, searching for deception and finding none. So what happens now? No, Claire said, a hint of steel returning to her voice. We spring the trap. Victor believes the prototype will catastrophically fail during the demonstration to our investors next week. Instead, he'll be the one exposed. She smiled thinly. But I need your help to make it happen. As the full scope of Claire's plan unfolded, Elijah realized he'd underestimated her. She hadn't just been testing his character that day on the roadside, she'd been looking for a very specific kind of ally. Someone who couldn't be bought, intimidated, or corrupted. Someone who had nothing left to lose. And in that moment, despite all his doubts and suspicions, Elijah made his second life-changing decision in less than a month. This time, with his eyes wide open. You still have time to walk away, Claire said, adjusting Elijah's tie in the empty conference room. The demonstration was scheduled to begin in 30 minutes. Beyond the glass walls, technicians were making final preparations on the prototype engine that would soon be unveiled to Davenport's most important investors and board members. Elijah gently moved her hands away. I'm not much for running. This isn't your fight, she persisted. Victor has powerful friends. Once we expose him, there will be consequences. Lady, I spent 2 decades watching good people lose their jobs because men like Victor decided profit margins mattered more than lives. Elijah straightened his shoulders, the tailored suit still feeling foreign against his skin. I'd say that makes it exactly my fight. Claire studied him, then nodded once. The moment Victor realizes what's happening, he'll try to discredit you. Are you ready for that? Let him try, Elijah said simply. The demonstration hall filled quickly. Elijah recognized some faces from business magazines, tech billionaires, venture capitalists, industry leaders. Victor moved among them confidently, occasionally glancing toward the prototype with a barely concealed smirk. At precisely 2 p.m., Claire stepped onto the small stage. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us today. Davenport Industries has always prided itself on innovation that shapes the future. Today, we're unveiling technology that will revolutionize energy consumption as we know it. She gestured to Elijah, who joined her on the stage. A murmur ran through the crowd. Clearly, they'd been expecting someone else. This is Elijah Carter, the mechanical genius who helped perfect our hydrogen injection system. Elijah, would you walk us through how the prototype works? As they had rehearsed, Elijah began explaining the engine's revolutionary design, using simple language that even the non-technical audience members could follow. He moved around the prototype, pointing out key components, deliberately drawing attention to the very parts that had been tampered with. From the corner of his eye, he saw Victor shifting uncomfortably, then whispering urgently to a security officer. Right on schedule. And this, Elijah said, gesturing to a particular valve, is perhaps the most crucial element. If it were to fail, or be deliberately sabotaged, the entire system would collapse catastrophically. A hushed silence fell over the room. Victor stepped forward, his face a mask of professional concern. Ms. Davenport, I think we should pause the demonstration. Our regular technician isn't running the controls, and I have concerns about safety protocols. Claire's smile was glacial. Mr. Chambers, are you suggesting Mr. Carter isn't qualified? Or perhaps you have another concern about the prototype? I merely think. Were you thinking about this? Elijah interrupted, tapping a command on the tablet in his hand. The massive screen behind them suddenly displayed security footage of Victor tampering with the engine. The room erupted in gasps and murmurs. Victor's face drained of color. Or perhaps you were thinking about these? Claire continued smoothly, advancing the presentation to show documentation linking Victor to Harrison Bennett, their chief competitor. Communications, financial transfers, all outlining a clear conspiracy to sabotage Davenport's innovation while securing your own golden parachute. Victor recovered quickly, his shock transforming into calculated calm. This is absurd. Claire, your father warned me about your paranoid tendencies, but this exceeds even his concerns. He turned to address the investors directly. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for this theatrical display. Ms. Davenport has been under tremendous pressure, and clearly. Activate the engine, Elijah. Claire cut in. All eyes turned to the prototype. If Victor's sabotage remained, activating the engine now would result in a highly visible, potentially dangerous, failure. Elijah met Victor's gaze steadily as he entered the command sequence. For a moment, the only sound was the soft hum of electronics powering up. Then the engine roared to life, its operation flawless, the performance metrics on the display showing efficiency levels beyond anything previously achieved. You see, Claire addressed the stunned audience. Mr. Carter didn't just discover the sabotage. He corrected it. And then we set a trap. Security personnel moved toward Victor, who backed away, his composure finally cracking. Richard will never allow this. You think you've won, but your father. My father, a powerful voice interrupted from the back of the room. Would like to hear you explain yourself, Victor. The crowd parted to reveal Richard Davenport himself, a commanding figure with Claire's same penetrating gaze, moving steadily forward with the aid of a cane. As Victor was escorted out, the investors surrounded the prototype, eager to see more. In the midst of the commotion, Claire pulled Elijah aside. You have a choice to make, she said quietly. I'm offering you a permanent position, Executive Director of Innovation. The media is already asking about you. By tomorrow, you'll be known as the brilliant mind behind our breakthrough. Elijah watched the wealthy, powerful figures circulating through the room, already forgetting the drama in their excitement over potential profits. And if I say no, then I'll respect your decision. The helicopter can take you home tomorrow. Claire's expression softened. But I hope you'll stay. Not for me, not even for the company. For what we could build together. Before he could answer, they were swept into a whirlwind of handshakes and congratulations. Hours later, when the demonstration hall finally emptied, Elijah slipped away from the celebrations. He found himself in the estate's small chapel, a place he'd discovered during his late-night wanderings. In the quiet sanctuary, he sat in a back pew and closed his eyes. I wish you could see this, Margaret, he whispered. I finally built something that matters. The choice before him wasn't really about a job title or a salary. It was about purpose, about using the skills he'd honed over a lifetime to create something that could change lives. For the first time since Margaret's death, Elijah felt the weight of his grief lifting, replaced by something that felt dangerously like hope. His decision was made long before the sun rose the next morning. Autumn painted the estate grounds in brilliant hues of red and gold. From the window of his new home, a modest but elegant cottage on the edge of the Davenport property, Elijah watched fallen leaves dance across his front yard. 6 months had passed since the prototype demonstration that had changed everything. His life now existed in curious contrasts. The cottage was luxurious by his old standards, but deliberately simple compared to the opulence of the main estate. He'd insisted on that, comfort without extravagance. Something that felt like it could be his. Inside, framed photographs of Margaret shared space with technical diagrams and industry awards. His work boots still sat by the door, mud-caked and worn, next to polished dress shoes he now wore to board meetings. The same weathered toolbox rested on a custom-built workbench where he still tinkered in the evenings, finding peace in the familiar rhythms of mechanical problem-solving. The sound of tires on gravel announced a visitor. Elijah smiled as he recognized Claire's electric sports car pulling up. She visited like this often, unannounced, usually with some new problem to solve or idea to discuss. You're still wearing those, she noted with amusement as she entered, pointing to his oil-stained work shirt and jeans. Some things don't need changing. Elijah replied, offering her coffee from the pot he brewed earlier. They settled into what had become a comfortable routine. Claire perched on a stool at his kitchen counter, Elijah leaning against the sink, both sipping coffee while the business of the day unfolded between them. "The board has unanimously approved your hydrogen engine for mass production," she said. "And Richardson Motors wants to license the technology for their new line." Elijah nodded. The aftermath of Victor's exposure had solidified Claire's position as CEO. With her father's support, and gradual retirement from day-to-day operations, she had begun reshaping Davenport Industries according to her vision. The company still pursued profit, but not at the expense of innovation and ethics. "I've been thinking," Claire continued, setting down her cup. "I want you to join the advisory board." Elijah shook his head. "We've been through this. I'm not a boardroom type. The board needs voices like yours, people who understand the real-world impact of our decisions." She leaned forward. "You've transformed our approach to design, Elijah. The engineers now regularly visit manufacturing floors, talk to workers, consider maintenance and repair from the beginning. That wouldn't have happened without you." "I prefer the workshop to the boardroom," he said simply. "I'm better with engines than egos." Claire smiled at the familiar argument. "Fair enough. But the offer stands." They moved to the porch, where the late afternoon sun bathed everything in golden light. Their silence was comfortable, the kind that exists between people who no longer need to fill every moment with words. "I never thanked you properly," Elijah said after a while. "For that day when your car broke down. For seeing something in me that I'd stopped seeing in myself." Claire studied him. "I didn't give you anything you didn't already have, Elijah. I just provided the opportunity. Still, most people in your position wouldn't have bothered. Most people in my position never leave the bubble they're born into." Claire's voice carried a hint of old sadness. "My father used to take me to factory floors when I was a child. He wanted me to understand what really mattered, the people who built things, who made ideas into reality. Somewhere along the way, he forgot his own lessons. And now he's remembering," Claire said. "Your influence extends further than you know." The ringing of Claire's phone interrupted them. She checked the screen and stood. "I have to take this. It's the international team." She paused at the steps. "There's something else I wanted to tell you. The helicopter is being prepared for tomorrow morning." Elijah raised an eyebrow. "Another mysterious trip?" "The International Engineering Symposium in Geneva. You're the keynote speaker." "Me?" Elijah laughed. "I barely finished community college. You're presenting your adaptation of our fuel delivery system, the one you designed in your spare time." Claire's eyes shone with genuine pride. "The patent was approved last week. It's officially the Carter method now." After she drove away, Elijah remained on the porch, watching the sun set behind distant mountains. His mind drifted to the unlikely journey that had brought him here, from a man fixing lawn-mower engines in a trailer yard to someone whose ideas would shape the future of transportation. His phone buzzed with a message from Claire. "Forgot to mention, pack a suit. And yes, you still have to wear a tie." Elijah smiled. The message underneath her teasing was clear: you belong there as much as anyone. Later that evening, as he prepared for the journey ahead, Elijah paused before the photograph of Margaret on his bedside table. "You wouldn't recognize my life now," he told her quietly. "Sometimes I barely do." He thought about Claire, not a friend exactly, not family, but something equally profound. Two people from different worlds who had found in each other something essential. She had given him purpose. He had reminded her of values nearly lost. Neither romance nor convenience had brought them together, but something rarer, mutual recognition of what truly mattered. As the stars appeared in the clear night sky, Elijah Carter, once a struggling mechanic, now an innovator whose name would be known around the world, felt a peace he hadn't known in years. Tomorrow the helicopter would return, not to rescue him from a life of quiet desperation, but to carry him toward horizons he once couldn't have imagined. This time, He would board it not as a desperate gamble but as a man who had found his way again. And somewhere, he liked to think, Margaret was smiling.